So God gave me this word, and not gonna lie, He gave me like a million thoughts at once. So I had to write it down. And usually when I do these, usually when I do these type of messages, they're very important and they seem like the most boring messages. So I really want whoever needs to listen to this to really listen to this. And my voice will get cracky. It always happens. But God just reminded me why it's so important to allow Him to lead and to not allow yourself to lead, to not lean on your own understanding. For one, you're not God, right? You're not omnipresent. You don't know what's in every single room. You don't know what tomorrow brings. You don't know every single conversation that's being had. You don't know how many rooms your name is being brought up in. You don't know everything. So leaning on your own understanding is literally pointless because you don't know how to operate the will of God because you don't know everything. And also, you don't know how to work around your sin. How God leads our life, he has to work around our sin because since sin started, there was a fall, right? There was a fall of humanity. And because since that fall, we are a product of sin. We are still we are still living in the consequences of Adam and Eve's sin. Whether you want to believe it or not, that's where it started. So because of that, the way that your life is going right now is a product of your own sin and other people's sin, right? Sin that isn't your fault and sin that is your fault. So sin creates delay, detours, and destruction. And because it creates that, when God destines His perfect will for our life, what would have taken to get to A to B 2 minutes, now it's going to take an hour by the more sin that we produce, right? So because of that, your life is a product of sin that is your fault and isn't your fault. The people that hurt you, the way you were raised, anybody that you encountered that betrayed you or, disrespected you, that's sin that you have no control over. And then there's sin that you do have control over your own disobedience to God, your own sin, right? And let's just say God intended for you to meet a specific person and you guys are supposed to marry. He intended this for your life at 20 years old. And at 20 years old, you did not wait to get married. You had sex before marriage and you said, you know what, I'm just going to sleep with whoever. I'm going to live my life however. So now what would have took you meeting your person at 20 years old, now you're going to meet your person at 25, but now you're going to have a bunch of sin that God has to go around, right? We have to understand we have free will. God is not just making things happen. He knows it's going to happen, but He doesn't control it, right? So He doesn't control our decisions. So if we're supposed to meet our person at 20 years old, yes, He has divine intervention, but we have free will to allow a detour, right? So if He destines you to meet your person at 20 years old, and at 20 years old, you're like, you know what, I just want to go through a little phase where I want to live my life, and then you start sleeping with multiple people, you're creating a spiritual tie to these people, right? That God has to break because now you're technically unclean. You're creating the likelihood of you catching more diseases, right? Because you're sleeping with multiple people. You're creating the likelihood of you having abortions, right? For you going more into sin because maybe you don't have the finances to provide for the child, you don't have the mental capability. You're creating that, and you're also creating a timing to where God has to allow you to go through a healing process before you can even have that husband or wife now. So you just created all those detours when God intended for you to meet them at a certain age. So you see how like our sin will create a delay. It will create delay, detours, and destruction when God intended it to be for a certain time. So when we say, all right, I'm going to just figure it out on my own, that is pointless because you don't know how to work around your sin, right? And then we get mad sometimes. This is for, I don't know, somebody need to pay attention to this. Sometimes we get mad at God because we're in a waiting season for so long, or God has us going through some type of healing season to where it's taking too long to get to whatever He intended us to get to, that He promised us, that we ignored, right? You have to understand, you put yourself in that mess, and also the people around you put yourself in that mess. Basically, sin put you in that mess, right? And because of sin, since the beginning of time, since Adam and Eve, God has to work around our sin, right? It's not just going to take one little small A to B. No, now it's going to take multiple detours. And just like you look at a GPS where God is the GPS, He tells you exactly where to go. Let's just say God says, all right, your starting point is 5:50 p.m. You're going to get there at 7 p.m. And you say, all right, I already know these roads. I'll do it my way. You ever use a GPS and you take the wrong turn and it adds time onto your destination? It's frustrating, right? It's frustrating because you weren't paying attention, because you decided, I'm going to just go my route. I'm going to just do whatever I want to do. And you put yourself in a worse situation to where now it's delayed. Now it's further, right? This is why it's so important to listen to God, because you don't know how to work around your sin. You put yourself through mental pain by getting into relationships that God did not intend for you to get in. You put yourself through spiritual pain by having sex before marriage, when God literally said, don't have sex before marriage, right? When God tells us not to sin, it's literally protection. Not having sex before marriage literally stops you from having possible abortions, stops you from having all these soul ties and all these spiritual ties and bonds, because sex is sacred. It's supposed to be between a covenant that God created between two people. You're also creating the likelihood of having some type of, I had a brain fart, but you're also creating a long healing journey that God's going to have to put you through before he can give you your person. Because you think, sometimes we always think like, God is preparing my person for me, that's why I'm waiting so long. God is preparing them, God is healing them. What if God is healing you so that you don't hurt them? What if God is protecting that person from you so that you don't hurt them? Sometimes it's not the other person. God is preparing you for that person because you have abandonment issues, because you cheat on all your partners, because you have a sex addiction, because you have a porn addiction. What if God is saving that person from you and saying, no, you need to heal so that that person's ready? What if that person's ready and it's you that needs to wait? And I told you, the message is going to be choppy. I'm all over the place, but whoever hears will hear. I'm going to read what I wrote because maybe, what I wrote is something that somebody needs to hear. First thing I wrote was something that I found in my notes from December 22nd, 2022. Not sure if that's specific to anybody, but it says 6 months of obedience produces a lifetime of freedom. And that's not to say 6 months exactly. It's just to say that consistent obedience allows you to be free, allows you to be saved, allows God's will to be done in his manner without hesitation, without resistance. Next thing I said was sin makes God's will harder to be fulfilled. The more sin that is in your life, there's going to be more resistance. There's going to be more delays for God's will. Another one I wrote that I want someone to pay attention to, I'm not sure. God didn't intend for sin. He just uses our sin and makes good out of it. Because a lot of people believe that, I was raised a certain way for a reason. God wanted me to be raised this way. He wanted me to be, betrayed so that that can be my story. He didn't intend for that. That wasn't his initial will. He just uses that situation out for good because he works everything out for good. Next one is very important. Every time that you make a decision, your story changes. And the last one that goes along with the previous one is there's always going to be two choices to choose from. There's always going to be two choices to choose from. Now, that doesn't mean that one is bad, one is good, because there's some situations that are very similar, such as, should I eat a sub today or should I eat pizza today? Those aren't really going to affect God's will for your life. But there's some decisions where, should I have sex before marriage? Should I not? If you choose to have sex before marriage, you're going down an entire longer route to get through God's will rather than this one. If you choose this one, God can work with that very, very much easier. But this one has more resistance and healing work to do because God has to work around your sin. So I don't know who needs to hear this. I know it's choppy, but if whoever needs to hear it is going to hear it. But this is why it's so important to allow God to lead, because you don't know everything and you cannot work out your sin. God can, right? You can't see all the mess that you put yourself in and how to work that out. This is why it's so frustrating when we try to do it ourselves and it never works because we don't know how. The video stopped. But God can work out your situation because he is on the bigger scale. He can see down at everything. He is outside of time. He is outside of this world. We are limited to this world. We can't see everything on a greater scale. So I don't know who needs to hear that, but allow God to work your situation out because he can work out your sin. And if he puts you in a season to where you have to wait, a waiting season of 6 months to a year, that is crucial because he has to work out your healing that you put yourself in. He has to work out a lot of sin that could have been from you, could have been from your parents, could have been from people that betrayed you, hurt you. He has to work around your sin.